Welcome to the Marketing Millennials, the No BS Marketing Podcast. I'm Daniel Murray, and join me for unfiltered conversations with the brains behind marketing's coolest companies. The one request I tell our guests, stories or it didn't happen. Get ready to turn the up.
A lot of our word of mouth is actually driven from our experience with our customer support team. And the word of mouth is that it's really helpful and effective to work directly with our customer support team to solve your problems as a customer. And then our customers go out and talk about our product to people that are not customers. And we talk a lot about how every interaction with your company and every person in your company is a reflection of your brand and eventually your product or service.
All right, so if you're a fan of the show, you probably know what a huge fan I am of using webinars for community building. And one of the top questions I get asked from marketers is what platforms they should use to host their webinars. That's where Wistia comes in. Wistia automatically creates a customizable registration page for every one of your webinars, so you can start generating new leads in no time. And when it's time to go live, Wistia gives you total control. You can bring panelists on and off stage with a click of a button and keep your audience engaged with Wistia's live chat, polls, and Q&A. Plus, performance tracking is a total breeze thanks to Wistia's easy sync with HubSpot, Adobe Marketo Engage, and Pardot. To make an awesome webinar today, visit wistia.com/live. That's wistia.com/live.
What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Marketing Millennials podcast. Today, I have Taylor. She's the Senior Director of Brand at Wistia. Excited for this conversation. She was not always in brand. She's a deep generalist too, so that's a cool little fun fact about her. So if you're a generalist out there, you raise your hand because most of our marketers have to be a generalist. But I'll pass it over to Taylor and ask how she got into marketing, and then we'll have to kick off with the conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel, for having me. I'm excited to be here. I got into marketing kind of by mistake. I was a co-op student at Northeastern and got my first co-op as a marketing and sales specialist at a little consumer packaged goods company, and fell into marketing and just really learned as I went. I didn't major in marketing. I was a communications major. I really had no idea what I wanted to do when I went to college, and just slowly learned on my own and read a lot of articles and read a lot of books and did a lot of hands-on work. And through my journey, went from a generalist to focusing on brand here at Wistia now.
One of the things you are passionate about talking about is taking creative risks. Could you go into why it's important to do that? And then we'll talk about how you think about taking those risks.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that in today as a business and as a brand, why you need to be taking creative risks or making space for creativity and risk taking is that there's such a overwhelming amount of content out there, and there's so many channels and formats and ways that you can connect with your target audience. And there's a lot of the same, you see a lot of the same videos, you see a lot of the same social posts, but when you give the space to think outside the box creatively and give the space to the people that are really creative within your company, or if you're working with agencies, you're able to really not only stand out from that deluge of content, but also think how your content and how your creativity is going to hit with your target audience. And I think the biggest thing is that if you know your audience really well, you know their pain points, you know their struggles, you know what they're trying to accomplish, you know their goals, by actually talking to them, you're then able to marry the message that's really resonating with them with something that's highly creative or highly outside the box that might grab their attention for, maybe a couple seconds on social, or make them share something out with their friends or colleagues that they found interesting from your brand. So I think without risk taking, without the space to do it, you're going to kind of get lost in the noise. And I know a lot of people say that, but I think it really matters when you're entering a new market, you're trying to maybe launch a new product. You have a big competitor when you're trying to go up against someone that you can't really outspend them. Creative can really stand out when you're in those kind of situations.
One question I have for you, I know why people decide to follow the trends and follow what everybody else is doing, because it's the most logical thing to do, because you see it's working for someone else. How do you internally make space in your, say, budget and space internally to pitch it, to be able to do this? Because I think that's the biggest worry, because logical things normally get by. You can go to your CMO and say, X, Y, and Z is doing it. Why aren't we doing it? That's an easier argument than, hey, nobody's doing it. Let's test it out. How do you think about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I like to think about it in a few ways. One is, you're right with budget. Like, if I'm going to set the budget at the end of the year for the next year, I'm going to actually allocate specific dollars that are for the unknown. They're for the opportunity that comes up, that you want to take a risk, or a place to play around with a campaign or a message or a piece of content. And so that gives your team, if you're a leader, or yourself as a IC, space to think and to brainstorm and to come up with the wildest things that you can think of that maybe won't happen, maybe you won't invest in it, but at least it gives you not only space, but it also gives you budget, because some of these things creatively need resources, and most of them do. Most of them need either a designer or someone on your video team or an agency, or just creative resources in general to really get that out there. And so giving your team or yourself parameters to think inside the guardrails of creativity is one thing I do. So I set aside budget for the year that we can use for whatever we want, experiments, whatever it may be. The second thing is starting small, or starting with things that are low risk. So you could take risks and they could be high risk, and that's scary and intimidating and hard to sell to your boss. But you could take a risk that's really low. We talk a lot about taking internal creative risks. So let's say you're a marketer and you are enabling your sales team with a new product feature or a new service that you're offering. Why not make a video that's fun and engaging and exciting for your sales team to engage with this new product feature, to learn about it, and think out creatively internally is a safe space. You're not going to misrepresent the brand in a public campaign. And that just gets the engine going. It gets the muscle going of thinking outside the box and trying out things. Because I think a lot of people are scared to try risky creative takes. And if you can do it in a safe space where there's very low risk, I think that just helps build that confidence, and also shows that, hey, this risk that we took internally, people love that video about the product feature. They watched it over and over again. They even shared it with a couple of other people on the customer success team. And so you build up that muscle to take more risks that are bigger maybe in the future.
I think that's actually a good point. I think another point too, which is a little higher risk, but a good place to test too, is customers. You could do that test, because it's a little higher risk, but customers already like you per se. So you could do a fun product feature video. It might not hit with them, but it's not going to turn them off for maybe buying your product. So the next level of internal could be test with a small, because they'll give you honest feedback too, and you can test it as a feedback thing with your customers, hey, does this resonate with you or not? And that's a smaller focus group to test with.
Yeah, that's a great idea, and probably won't cost you much. Maybe the creative itself will cost you something, but you're not putting ad dollars behind that. You're just testing the audience that already knows you and can probably give you very honest feedback or open feedback. So I like that idea.
So I want to go a little bit into, because I know a lot of people ask this question. So when you're setting the budget, since it's 2025 is coming up, how do you actually think about a brand budget? What goes into that planning of that brand budget?
So there's like two scenarios. One, you're new to a company and you've never set a budget before, or you don't have a template to go off of. Or the other scenario is you can like build off of a previous year's budget and evolve. I think the first scenario is really exciting, but probably a little bit daunting. Like you have to kind of come up with the whole template on your own, which you don't have to. Like you can partner with other people on your team. But I think the things that I think about when I come to budgeting is what's like the baseline things that we have to do, like the things that marketers invest in day out. And that is, supporting advertising programs, it's events, whether they're virtual or in person. It's creative resources, whether they're internal or external. Like probably externally, you'll be factoring those into your budget. And then there's the additive things. So swag, if you're doing a lot of events, you probably need a lot of swag. If you're doing giveaways, if you're running special types of campaigns, you'll need to factor that in. And then again, that experiment budget. So like, what's that bucket that you can play around with and maybe use on social for boosting posts, or maybe creating a special video outside of your company with a partner. And so I think about like those core things. And then that's if like you're just starting out. I think the way that we do budgeting at Wistia is over the last I've been here almost 4 years. I tend to build on the budgets from last year. So I'll look at what we did last year. Was the investment as a percentage of the whole for each of our activities? So advertising, partnerships, events, PR, are all those like percentages realistic to what, or equating to the effort that it's, or the output that those programs are putting out? Is advertising, for example, producing enough to validate being 30% of our overall marketing budget? And so we're looking at a lot of the performance and then comparing what the percentage of the overall budget might be, and adjusting year over year. And I've been at companies where marketing budget is very tight. So you really have to nickel and dime yourself. And you have to really weigh what's going to drive the most impact for your business, whether it's sales or customer retention or awareness. But luckily at Wistia, we've been growing our annual spend for marketing year over year and investing more and more in brand because we see the value of it. So it really depends on what your goals are when you're thinking about your budget and how to align to it.
I think another factor, which you kind of alluded to, is people always think about money spent on certain action, but they don't think about resources it takes up to do certain action, which is also something you have to budget for. Because if you're going to do a campaign, it could take away from X people doing, let's say the creative team, they could be creating ads, but instead they have to do a lot of things for an event you're doing. So it's this resource allocation is something you have to budget for as well. I think a lot of people think I got to put X money here, and I also love that you still talking about that risk budget, because I think I've been in a lot of companies where we want to take a risk, but we had to go scramble and cut budgets in places we didn't want to crush because we didn't have free money set aside to do some creative thing over here. So I think those two things are things people should think about when also budgeting as well.
Yeah, and I think on the experiments budget, I'm fortunate at Wistia that we have a lot to play with. But like this at other companies, this has been like $500 a month or $2,000 a month. Like it's just giving yourself the amount to play with that maybe you don't even spend month to month. Maybe it all comes up in 1 month and you use it in a campaign. It just gives you that like that relief that you don't have to go and again pitch that idea or beg for more budget because you had this opportunity. It just gives you like that padding of flexibility that I think can be really stressful for a marketer or for a leader to have to think about like, oh no, we didn't think about that. But if it's in there and it's padded, you have that wiggle room to experiment and play around with things.
I love hosting webinars. Seriously, they're one of the best marketing tools to take advantage of. Level up your marketing game with Wistia's all-in-one webinar platform. Whether you've got tons of experience hosting webinars or none at all, Wistia makes it easy to create, host, market, and analyze your webinars. It's seriously foolproof. Go to wistia.com/live to start generating and nurturing leads with webinars. That's wistia.com/live.
So there's that unknown budget. Is there also a test that you're going to do that you didn't do last year, slice of the budget, or is that factored into the unknown budget?
It depends on planning, to be honest. Like if we reset our goals for next year and let's say, so actually a great example this year, we were like, we're going to invest more in events, in person and our own hosted events and conferences. And we said at the end of last year, like a part of that, of our overall budget needs to go to this new initiative. And so we dedicated an estimate of what we thought we might spend this year for events if we really wanted to like double down on it. And then there's the padding just in case something else needs budget. But budgeting and planning go hand in hand in terms of where we're going to invest in new places.
What are some, you don't have to say exactly, but what are some risks that you've taken that really paid off that you had no idea it would? And what are some of the other side of the coin of some examples that you might have thought was going to pay off and didn't really pay off?
It's funny because we talked, I did a session at Inbound this year about creative risk taking, and we talked about with my co-presenter, Sam Balter, who's on our content team, about things that did well and things that did not do so well. This year at Wistia, we took a big risk with our State of Video report. We did a live show, or we branded it live to launch the report. But we actually did all pre-recorded content for most of the show. It was a 45-minute show, 30 minutes was pre-recorded, and then we did a live Q&A. And we were really worried, or at least the risk that we thought we were taking is that people weren't going to be engaged in this pre-recorded content. They would feel like they got misled, like it's a live show, but actually all of this is pre-recorded. And we actually put so much resources into the production of the pre-recorded content and really thought it out and really like made out these segments that were going to be really fun and engaging, that it ended up being like one of our best live webinars or live shows that we've done. And we were able to actually like interact with people on chat because we weren't presenting. We were just sitting there waiting for the live Q&A. So that was like a really exciting, fun risk that we took this year. It was a lot of effort, but we kind of debunked that pre-recorded content during a live event. It works. Like if it's done well and the messaging is right and the creative is really, really well orchestrated, it'll work. So that was one that we did that paid off. And then career-wise, like I took a risk back when I used to work at HubSpot. I was the only marketer there focusing on nonprofit and EDU marketing. So we did these vertical teams and I was the vertical owner for that marketing. And we had written a book about inbound marketing for nonprofits. We wrote it in time for that year's Inbound conference. We gave it out at the conference. It was really exciting to like write a book with a ghostwriter and tell the story and the tips and the tricks and best practices for this vertical of how to use marketing for their great causes. And then we did no promotion after that. And surprise, surprise, no one bought the book. It just flopped, and we had no plan to really do a lot of promotion behind it, and that was our fault. Like, we took the risk of thinking that it would just take off because we had the brand recognition of HubSpot, but in that vertical, people were like, they weren't connected to the brand yet, and so it didn't really take off the way we thought it would. And so that book is just sitting on my shelf now, and I look at it and say, oh wow, that was amazing.
I actually love that you debunk the pre-recorded thing, because we just did our virtual festival, and I would say like 80% of the content was pre-recorded. And it also gives the two things that you said. One, TV shows are like really filmed before and then put live. So why can't you do that for B2B? And second, I really love that I could, instead of my worst is when I'm giving on a webinar or a virtual event, and I have to try to look at the chat and speak at the same time. It distracts you, and it actually distracts you from doing live things. So it's actually way better if you want to keep the engagement going and say hey to people in the chat while the recording's going on. So I like that you took that risk, but it's funny because a lot of the risks we take in B2B, there's proven things in e-commerce and the consumer, and we just forget. I feel like at B2B, we think they're a different audience sometimes. It's not like we want to, but every time I'm in B2B, I think we get this like thing stuck in our head that, oh, they're not going to like this. They're not going to like this but that's a cool thing you all did it.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned TV, because the segments that we did for the State of Video Live were inspired by SNL. So we had like a weatherman doing the weather about like all of our video benchmarks. We had the data desk that we like would cut to, and they would talk about some of the stats. It's really funny, but it was really inspired by television, which, SNL is live, so we weren't like totally live, but yeah, that's where we got some of our inspiration from, because we know that format worked. We just, have never seen I've never seen a B2B webinar in the vibe of SNL. So, but you're totally right.
And it's also, SNL is like high production. So to do that live, they've done it a million times. So if you can do exactly what someone's doing, you could do a easier version for yourself as a production team.
Yeah.
Take multiple takes. I think it doesn't always have to be exactly what other people are doing, but inspiration should come from everywhere. I love that you took inspiration from SNL. That you didn't take inspiration from what HubSpot did and decided to do that at Wistia. So that's a lesson in itself, that look outside your industry, look outside your space.
Yeah, I would say another example of like looking outside your industry, we just launched like our big brand campaign starting in September, and we took inspiration from the music industry of how music artists promote their albums over time. And we, dissected that, like, they're dropping singles after single after single on social and on Spotify, and then they like culminate in the album release. And that's kind of like the end point. And so we took inspo from that for the brand campaign, and tying in not only beautiful, highly creative video content, but each ad set that we're launching has a custom written and recorded song behind it. And the song and the video are kind of our singles that we're dropping over the next 6 to 8 months. And so at some point it might culminate in something like an album drop. But that was another industry that we pulled inspiration from. And that works so well on social. Like, music is so powerful on social, and B2B has a hard time breaking through the noise on social. And so looking to see what's working on those channels you want to get through outside of your own industry or your own even like vertical is a way to get those like creative ideas going and seeing what might work for your brand.
Also, what you said, it takes less pressure on having to do a big launch and making that successful. If you do many drops, you can iterate as you go and until that big launch happens. But if you put all this pressure in marketing to do a huge big launch and it doesn't be successful, it's put so much pressure to you. So if you can break it up into small segments before the launch and then accumulate and build hype, those are the best types of launches where you can build hype before you launch.
Yeah, and we're learning a lot from like each ad set and then each single that we're launching. We're learning and evolving for the next one. And so, yeah, I totally agree. Like it doesn't take all the pressure off, but it takes the major like moment of a day and a time when you're dropping something or launching something. It does take that pressure off. And so it's been really fun and different for us. Like Wistia has been the traditional like, let's make a splash on a day and a time and every channel at the same time. And now we're kind of like giving ourselves some breath and space to learn and evolve and iterate on like really, really fun creative. So it's been really cool.
Another question I have for you is, I know it's hard for brand teams out there because they're not usually the most tied to a revenue number. So how have you at Wistia or in your career um, advocated for brand internally to make sure that, one, it's a must do thing, because it is a must do thing and people forget that. But that's also blows my mind that it is, that people forget that it's a must do thing. But that's another talk for another time. But how do you in B2B make sure that brand needs to stay in the forefront of every leader's mind?
Yeah. I think the shift from brand like for decades, before the internet, before all of that, brand was such an important part of any company's strategy. It was like the thing that put them out there in front of the world. And then in the last, like, I would say 15 years, maybe less, maybe 10, performance marketing has become so like all consuming. And we've become so tied to all the data that we've been getting because we never had the data to tell us how marketing was performing or what was driving sales. Like it was very nebulous when we didn't have all those metrics and analytics. And I think what we're seeing is the shift back away from that performance driven only marketing where you're focusing only on revenue goals back to brand, because you do need to stand out and because everyone is kind of like worked the system, to be honest, of like performance marketing. And so I'm lucky at Wistia that brand is part of our culture. It's part of our company strategy. It's not something that we need to sell leadership on, but that has not been my experience for the majority of my career. And it has been very hard to convince leadership or people that really never were close to brand and brand strategy to invest in it. And I think it's also hard to measure. Even at Wistia, like we have a hard time measuring the brand impact, but we do look at specific metrics. We look at branded search volume, so how many people are actually looking for Wistia on a search engine. We look at word of mouth, so how many people are mentioning Wistia on social media and what's our overall followership across all our channels. And then we look at our overall traffic from an organic and direct perspective, because those two channels are people organically finding us or looking for us and coming to Wistia directly. And so those metrics give you like a direction of where brand is impacting your business. And can help you make some justifications for investment. But it's really tricky when leadership doesn't have the experience or can't tangibly tie a revenue goal to your efforts. And so that's where I kind of go back to taking those low risks, like testing out something that you think is going to drive a lot of awareness for your brand that maybe doesn't cost a lot. And that's like a kind of a hard thing to think about. But like influencer marketing is a great example. Like it's pretty cost effective to work with influencers. You get in front of new audiences. And I think there's low lift ways of testing out that kind of strategy to prove that brand is impactful and should be invested in the future. But it's still tough. I've been doing this for like 15 years and it's still a hard thing to get past people.
It's actually funny because in B2B especially, most people are just capturing people who already want to buy in the market and that lets them survive for 2 to 3, 4 years, and then they realize, why haven't we invested in brand? And then it's too late. So it's always good. I always say, like, all your efforts, even paid, is doing brand. When you're putting a target piece of creative on an engine to a target audience, you're still branding yourself, and you still have to go out in a way that represents your brand in a good way. So there's so many things that are even performance marketing is branded performance, really. It's not. So everywhere, that's where people forget it. Every time you showing up, every touch point is brand, whether you like it or not. And that's what people forget a lot of the time.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, we talk about this a lot internally, that a lot of our word of mouth is actually driven from our experience with our customer support team. And the word of mouth is that, like, it's really, really helpful and effective to work directly with our customer support team to solve your problems as a customer. And then our customers go out and talk about our product to people that are not customers. And we talk a lot about how every interaction with your company and every person in your company is a reflection of your brand and eventually your product or service. And so not only, like, again, like you just said, not only is it about the creative you put out there at the top of the funnel for awareness, it's also the value that you're providing people through your products or services, or how you're treating them as a customer support rep. And so everyone represents your brand in some way and how they interact with people. And it's important that everyone feels that ownership internally, because it does reflect on you down the road.
Yeah, because if you just replace brand with reputation, I think people might think of it differently, because it is your reputation in the market. And that's like the same thing when I talk about personal branding with founders. It's like, you already have a reputation in the market. You're just trying to amplify that reputation and brand to more people. You already have someone knows something about you. Maybe it's a small group or a bigger group, but someone knows something about you in the market. So how you show up every touch point is affecting your reputation in a positive or negative way, however you put it. So,
Yeah, I love that.
lastly, I want to ask you, what is a marketing hill you would die on?
A marketing hill I would die on. Oh boy. The age-old argument that my audience isn't on social media. I will die on the hill that your audience is on social media. They're on it probably all day. They're just not connecting with your brand on it, because you're not thinking about that channel as its own, like, living and breathing space, that you need to tailor your content, tailor your voice, tailor your brand to how content shows up on social. And I say that because you might have a beautiful product video, but it's shot horizontally, and you need to make that into a vertical video, but you can't just, like, reformat that video. You have to do, like, a talking head with, like, the green screen behind you talking through the product. So I will die on the fact that you can find people on social that will buy your product. You're just not doing it in the right way.
I mean, +1 to that. I'll live all day on that hill. I also think that we always, as sometimes us as marketers, forget how we consume on platforms as, like, everyday people, not just marketers. And we don't put ourselves in the shoes of how would we want to see a LinkedIn post? How would we want to see a Facebook post? How would we want to see an IG post? How would we want to see a TikTok? Oh, what are the videos we actually are looking at right now, and what are we interacting with? And I think if you just reverse engineer that, it's way easier for you to think about what to put on social for your brand. So I'll +1 to that. Lastly, where can people find what you're doing or anything Wistia related?
Yeah. So I'm mainly on LinkedIn, so you can find me there, Taylor Corrado. And then you can follow Wistia at any and all social platforms at Wistia. But yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining. I really appreciate it, and it's been great chatting.
Yeah, this was great. Thanks, Daniel.
Thanks so much for listening. Keep tuning in to hear more great insights from the coolest marketers from around the world. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and follow the Marketing Millennials podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like what you hear, I would greatly appreciate you giving us a 5-star rating. It helps bring more marketers into our community.